Hi folks, today's video is maps versus theater of the mind. So one choice you're going to end up making as a game master, whether conscious or not, is whether you are going to use maps or theater of the mind for your encounters. They both have their pros and cons, so let's dive into that today to help you figure out what method is going to work best for you. And hey, if you're new here, I'm Dawn. This is Roll for Initiative. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button because we make videos here every week all about tabletop RPGs and our other geeky interests. And that way, you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Okay, so let's dive into the pros and cons. Starting off with what might be the kind of more traditional method for tabletop role-playing games. Maps. So I say traditional because a lot of folks, when they think of tabletop role-playing games like D&D, Pathfinder, maps and miniatures are integral to the gaming experience, whether it's a quick sketch on some grid paper and a few tokens gathered from around the table, or super in-depth 3D terrain and painted miniatures, or even virtual tabletops. A lot of times maps go very hand in hand with tabletop role-playing games. The first thing that maps do super well is they clearly show where things are. With maps and miniatures, your players are going to be able to see where their characters are in relationship to the terrains as well as the other enemies and other creatures on the table. If you're running an encounter with lots of enemies or complex terrain, being able to have an accurate visual representation of the encounter will prevent a lot of confusion with your players. It's going to be a lot harder to forget that an enemy is still alive or accidentally stumble into the lava because they thought it was 5 feet further away than they actually were. The second thing that Maps does well is you don't end up wasting time describing the scene. And this is especially true if you're the type of game master who've put a lot of time into crafting the terrain or have a well-designed printed or digital map. You can do some basic scene setting and then reveal the map to the players and let the art or terrain do the rest of the description. So it can help you jump into combat faster. Next up, maps work really well when you need to know the exact locations and distances of everything on the map. So if you're running in a system like D&D or Pathfinder that have a lot of spells, abilities, and movement rules that are based on distance, having a map is going to make this a lot easier. You aren't going to have your players asking over and over, how far am I away from this enemy? Can I get there with my movement? They can count out the squares themselves. This also applies to encounters that involve complex traps or puzzles. I was in a game where there was a puzzle involving essentially moving lasers that we had to move to hit certain crystals to open and close doors, but also keep them from keep the beams from crossing. And so the game master had a map for this, and that made it a lot easier for us to figure out where we needed to move things and how to do it to open the doors we wanted to have open and close the doors that had the big scary monster behind it closed. Whereas if we had tried doing this all verbally in a theater of the mind, it would have been a lot more complicated. Instead, we could just say, okay, I'm going to push this 10 feet and move that representation of the laser on the map itself. This would have been a much more tedious encounter to figure out if we didn't have that visual representation right in front of us. Maps are great if you have players who struggle with visualizing. Some people really struggle or just aren't capable of getting a good mental picture purely based on description. So if you have a player like this at the table, they may need some kind of visual representation to understand the scene and kind of get everybody on the same page. And the final thing that maps do really well is it's fun, whether it's creating the perfect map or getting to pull out those cool miniatures you've bought and painted. This can be a huge part of the fun of tabletop role-playing games, both for game masters and players. I enjoy drawing maps and painting miniatures. It's a fun creative outlet for me. And when I get to reveal a map or pull out a miniature I'm particularly proud of and my players take a moment to admire it and go, oh, that's so cool. Can I take a look at that? Oh, wow, that's really neat. That makes me feel good. And as a player, it's fun for me to find and paint up a miniature that represents my character. Speaking of maps, if you're interested in picking up some of the maps that I've drawn, you can head on over to our Patreon page and check out the perks of being a patron. Special thanks to Joan, as well as all of the rest of our patrons for helping us make these videos. Okay, so those are all of the strengths when it comes to maps. Now, the main weakness to using maps is it doesn't allow for getting lost. Even if you are using a form of fog of war, whether that's a black piece of paper sitting on a tabletop map or using a fog of war feature in a virtual tabletop, most of your time the players will be able to see that there's more map over there, or if they're running through a dungeon, maze, forest, whatever, they're going to be able to kind of see this is the route we took, this is the way we can get back, because they have that bird's eye view of the map. Versus when the characters are actually in that situation, they wouldn't have that bird's eye view, and so it might be, oh shoot, which tunnel leads back to the entrance? It's going to be a lot harder for your players to not metagame those situations if they don't have a map in front of them. Similarly, maps can sometimes cause players to linger. They can see, oh look, there's a part of the house we haven't explored yet, which sometimes can be great because then they won't miss something that you want them to go find. But I've also been in a game where we spent 15, 20 extra minutes searching through a part of the map where there really wasn't anything there just because we didn't want to miss something, even though we had accomplished what we had came there to do. So it was just a lot of wasted time. All right, so what about theater of the mind? If you aren't familiar with this term, this is where you just use the description and your imagination to envision the area for an encounter. And like maps, it's got its strengths and weaknesses. First off, it's easier to improvise. Whether it's an entire encounter or just terrain elements, you can make it up on the spot. I find Theater of the Mind works really great for random encounters that I don't have a map ready for. And in some games, it's fantastic because if a player asks, hey, is there a chandelier by this balcony? I can say yes and allow them that fun moment where they get to swing from the chandelier onto somebody. Whereas if I had a map and they looked at it and said, oh, well, there's not this element on the map, it kind of limits them with what they see rather than kind of getting to fill in details with their imagination. Theater of the Mind can lead to streamlined combat, especially if you only have one or two enemies. You can be a little less specific. I'm not saying you can't give detailed description that really paints a picture for your players, but maybe you ignore distant rules or exact movement limits, and so you say, yeah, you're close enough for this spell to work. Whereas if you were using a map, you might sit there and go, oh shoot, you're 5 feet too far away. So that can kind of speed up combat. Again, really great for some of those random encounters that you don't want lasting a long time. Next, it leads to more cinematic descriptions because players don't have to be as focused on counting squares, moving their minis. They have to be more descriptive with what they're doing and can lead to really great moments where they are describing a lot more of the choices their characters are making rather than focusing on the mechanics. Theater of Mind is great if any of your players are blind or have vision impairment. You know, everybody's on the same page. We're all using our imagination instead of one person trying to imagine and everybody else looking at a map. And finally, Theater of the Mind is really great if you don't have terrain or minis, whether that's because you don't have those things for financial reasons, or you just are running a game where you don't or can't want to lug everything with you. You can still run the encounter without needing the physical stuff. So the major drawback with Theater of the Mind is it can be a little confusing if you aren't very good at describing the scene, and kind of, as I was saying with some of the pros with maps, if you have a very complicated encounter or are using a lot of very precise abilities and spells, that's going to be a lot. You're going to waste a lot more time running it with Theater of the Mind if you are using those kind of rule sets. So which one is better? Well, I think it really depends on your game and your table. For me personally, I like using maps in crunchier games like D&D and Pathfinder, where I want to be able to use rules for cover, movement, area of effect spells. And then I mainly use Theater of the Mind in games that are kind of naturally more cinematic, like 7th Sea or a lot of indie games. But you can also combine them. I was in a Shadowrun game where we mainly did Theater of the Mind, but we had the occasional encounter where having some kind of visual representation of the environment made it a lot easier and clearer. So our GM would sketch out a map so that we were all on the same page of where things were roughly. And I've also used Theater of the Mind in D&D and Pathfinder games for fast encounters that don't require the map. How about you? Do you have a preference between using maps or Theater of the Mind? And if you're interested in checking out some of my maps, I've done some process videos, you can check them out. Or if you become a patron at the familiar level or above, you get access to a new map every month. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! Similarly, maps can sometimes cause players to lingo. Oh, lingo? Lingo. Lingo!